The film begins with a flashback scene in 1955. At that time, Budiman Sailendra was still actively working as a well-known mass media journalist in Indonesia. Without any wind and rain, Budiman was forcibly picked up by the police, taken to a place in the middle of nowhere. In a mind full of questions, where will it be taken? Budiman noticed the figure of the man sitting next to the wheel and kept looking at him. After traveling quite a distance, they arrived in Lembang, West Java on April 17, 1955. As soon as they got out of the car, Budiman was greeted by an old friend who was a police commander, Major Heru Kusuma. The commander's face looked serious that morning. Heru invited Budiman to immediately enter the Bosca Observatory building. Unexpectedly, dozens of corpses, complete with dull shrouds, prostrated to face Raymond's image. The tense scene in the room left Budiman dumbfounded, unable to speak. Budiman could only take pictures of some of the corpses in front of him in apprehensive conditions. Apparently, Heru asked Budiman to help thoroughly investigate the incident where the body was found secretly. Heru also asked Budiman not to spread the shocking news to the public so that the state event of the Asian-African Conference, which was held in Bandung, would not be disturbed. Budiman was asked to create a new mass media, which spread rumors regarding the discovery of bodies so that people who read the news could be more introspective. The scene returns to 1984, after Rini's family moved into a flat after a ghost attack in the previous sequel. At that time, Rini lived in a government-owned flat with her entire family. In addition to taking care of her father and younger siblings, Rini works as a factory worker in Jakarta. On April 15, 1984, Rini received an offer from her superior, Hayati Darsono, to continue her studies in order to be promoted to a higher position in the company. Even though Rini insisted on refusing the offer of a college scholarship, Mrs. Hayati persisted. Hayati emphasized that the offer of free scholarships is a rare thing, which should not be wasted. Rini walked away with an undecided heart, whether to choose to stay or go to study. On the other hand, Rini Sawana was reluctant to leave the family whose mother Mawani Sawana died. However, the golden offer to improve the family's economy was another solution that could be done at that time. While waiting for public transportation to return to the flats, people were shocked by the bloody tragedy of the mysterious shooting or Peter. Widely in the newspapers or in the mass media, Peter targeted people with tattoos who were considered criminals and a burden on the state. Arriving at the flats, the building seemed to be alone, with no other buildings around it. It was as if the building stood on an empty lot, on the outskirts of the city, away from the hustle and bustle of human activity. As usual, Rini Sawana, jostled with other residents of the flat, took the elevator to the 8th floor, where she lived. The limited availability of lifts, with capacities exceeding the threshold, makes the lifts easily damaged and often experience disturbances. Before entering the room, Rini had time to greet Wisnu, who has a speech-impaired mother. The two of them were about to go out to buy rice at the market, while Rini stepped into the house. And the film begins. When Rini arrived at the flat, Bondi Sawana, Rini's sister, was playing in the field around the flat, with Ari Gunawan and Darto Suhaimi. Bondi showed a mound of X-graves that kept plain tombstones in it. Darto said that Bondi had been chased by the undead. Apparently, Bondi told a mystical incident that he experienced with his family before finally moving to the flat. While they were joking, suddenly, Ari's father came and hit his eldest son on the head. The father brought along Weena, Ari's sister, who had been whining from hunger. Ari's father often played with his hands and tortured his own son. He drags Ari back to the flat and helps him work. Darto said that during this time, Ari's mother was very sick and could only lie down all day. In fact, Ari's mother was reluctant to speak. Not long after, Tony Sawano, Bondi's older brother, returned to the flat using his motorbike. Tony meets the prettiest girl in the flat, named Tari Ariati. Just about to enter the flat, Tari was already teased by the youths there. Tony quietly walked after Tari because he was stunned to see the beauty of the city girl. Feeling stalked, Tari did not accept it. Tari confronts Tony not to bother her and follows her home. Tony introduced himself living on the 8th floor and was a good boy. Tari, who lives in flat number 919, asked Tony to help repair the door to her house, which was often jammed and difficult to open. Besides asking to fix the door, Tari also asked Tony to fix his radio that wouldn't turn on. Tony brought the radio home with a flowery heart and a smile on his face. Rini and Bondi, who saw Tony sobbing alone at the door, immediately became suspicious. Tony explained that he had managed to meet the girl he wanted, who worked at a pool hall. Not long after, Bari Sawano, their father, returned to the flat after a long day of work. Bari kept his briefcase on the desk shelf and locked it tightly. The man hurriedly sat down at the dining table to join his children for dinner. On that occasion, Rini revealed that she would take the offer of a college scholarship and go out of town. Rini invited his father and younger siblings to join him in moving to a city near his campus the next day. Tony warns that tomorrow there will be a thunderstorm. Most likely, North Jakarta will be flooded. Bari's father insists on Rini to go out of town alone, while his father and younger siblings will stay in the flat. The conversation stopped, replaced by the sound of television broadcasts predicting a big storm tomorrow, Monday, April 16, 1984. After dinner, Rini continued her activities of throwing trash in the garbage locker. Strangely, that night the locker could not be opened. Forced, Rini went down to the 7th floor to dispose of household waste. Rini passed through a dark hallway where all the residents of the 7th floor were busy with their respective activities. After taking out the trash, Rini was surprised by the residents of the 7th floor who came out of their house, looking at Rini with a sharp gaze. At the same time, Bondi is lying on the sofa watching the news, while Tony is busy repairing Tari's radio. News that night was still circulating about a mysterious shooting which is said to have reached 2,000 people since 1981. Not long after, Rini entered the house full of fear. Rini refuses to tell what happened and throws Bondi off the sofa. As usual, that night they slept in front of the television, while Bari's father slept in the room. Outside their flat, little Wisnu walked to the garbage disposal locker with a garbage bag from his house. Vishnu had difficulty opening the locker until when he left, the trash locker opened by itself. Vishnu immediately threw away his trash, but there was a crack hole that was too big to clog the drain. Vishnu pushed the trash with a stick until his feet almost fell into it. At that moment, Vishnu heard a heartbreaking male voice calling his name. The frightened Vishnu tried his best to get half of his body out of the trash locker. After making it out of there, Vishnu heard the voice of a man asking for help. Suddenly, the ghost of Vishnu's late father, who was killed by a fire, appears to scare the little man. Vishnu ran back to the flat while closing the photo of his late father. The echo of Milwarni Sawano's old song could be heard in every corner of the flat that night. In room A10, Bondi, Tony, and Rini were already asleep in a deep sleep. They never turned off the television until the broadcast ended that night. Televisions whose broadcast time runs out at that time will be blurry and tingling. Behind the black and white ants, the female ghost of Milwarni appeared, and smiled looking at her children. Until morning came. On Monday, April 16, 1984, Butaman Sailendra was still working as an investigative editor at a supernatural magazine called Maya. Decades have now passed since Butaman was asked to solve the 1955 body discovery case. Butaman is still gathering evidence to combat this supernatural crime. 30 years have passed so quickly, leaving the stifling news when Major Haru Kujima was found dead by suicide. Butaman received a package from Haru which contained several items, one of which was a photo of Bari when he was young, a photo of a newly built flat, and a pair of anguish. Apparently, Major Haru wanted to give information about a supernatural crime closely related to the discovery of a corpse in 1955. Inside the will, Butaman found a picture of a pagan symbol, and a sacred bell-like object called the Pair of Anguish. When he saw the photo of Bari Sawana, Butaman remembered when he was forcibly picked up to the Bosca Observatory. As it turned out, Bari was the man sitting beside the wheel, staring intently at him. Butaman realized there was danger in the apartment and rushed there. At the same time, in the morning, Rini was ready to go out of town to achieve her dream of studying S1. The hustle and bustle of the activity of the residents of the flats that morning had already filled the elevator area, including Tari, who had just come home from work. Suddenly, a woman carelessly opened her purse and the clatter of loose change spread around the elevator. The modestly built flats were damaged here and there until the floor had holes in them, so the change was trapped under the elevator. On the 10th floor, Bondi and Dardo waited for their friend who was being scolded by his father. Ari runs away from his father's tantrum and invites Bondi and Dardo to follow him. They descended using the stairs, while Ari's father chased after using the elevator. On the 8th floor, Tara came down because she saw Tony in front of the elevator. Meanwhile Pak Bari, Tony's father, entered the elevator to carry out his usual activities. Apparently, Tari accidentally met Tony to ask for help from the pursuit of Dino Sahender, a naughty young man who keeps chasing after Tari. When Dino and Tari argued, the elevator from the 8th floor rose to the 14th floor. The elevator shook and jammed on the top floor of the flat. The elevator passengers who had been waiting for a long time on the ground floor rushed up the stairs knowing that the elevator was stuck above. Weena and her 3 friends stared at the gaping elevator door. Moreover, on the ground floor of the elevator, there were scattered coins that fell from the wallet of the woman passenger in the elevator. The children immediately ran for joy into the elevator hall so they could collect as much change as possible. At the same time, Vishnu with his mother, Bari's father and all the elevator passengers on the 14th floor made him even more panicked. Getting stuck in an elevator was quite common in those days. Even though they were able to open the elevator doors, only Vishnu managed to get out. Meanwhile, the other elevator passengers also jumped to the ground floor because the elevator was starting to fail. Weena, who realized there was movement from above, gasped and ran outside while shouting at her friends. Unfortunately, it's too late. In the evening after Maghrib, at 7:30, Mr. Ustad Mahmood was assisted by the residents of the flats to bathe the bodies and shroud them one by one. Many of the residents of the flats died in the elevator crashing that day. The sound of the recitation was heard from each funeral home. Ari's father, who was a passenger in a broken elevator, also died with a charred and terrible body condition. Weena, Ari and their mother could only cry seeing their father being shrouded. Meanwhile, Rini, still in the flat, refuses to go to college because of an elevator accident that also happened to Pak Bari, her father. Rini, Bondi, and Tony stayed at home waiting for the news that Bari's father was safe, although his leg was injured. Miraculous, because Bari's father was the only passenger in the elevator who survived the deadly accident. Bari was questioned by the local police, however, he could not give any information because he fainted after the fatal incident. Rini took the initiative to go to Vishnu's house whose mother died. That night, the bodies were still in their respective homes, while waiting for relatives from outside Jakarta to arrive. The plan is that all the bodies will be buried tomorrow, April 17, 1984. In another place, Pak Budiman has difficulty finding public transportation that can take him to the Mandara flat in North Jakarta. All passing vehicles refuse to go to Mandara because heavy rains caused flooding in the destination area. Even passing taxis refuse to take Budiman to Mandara. A man named Buttara was seen standing at the same bus stop as Budiman. Buttara said that in the Mandara flat, there had just been an elevator crash that killed many passengers. Hearing this, Budiman became increasingly determined to go to the Mandara flat at any cost. Budiman tightened his intentions while checking the bullets and pistols in his bag. At the same time, Pak Ustad escorted the residents of the flats who wanted to evacuate after attending the Talilan. Heavy rains have made residents afraid of being trapped by floods for days in the flats. They chose to take refuge in a relative's house in a flood-free area. Meanwhile, Ustad Mahmud chose to stay in the flat, guarding the funeral home in the flat that was quiet that night. The notification of a big storm made most of the residents of the flats evacuate, leaving Rini and her family and several other people who survived, including Tari. That night after repairing the radio, Tony went to Tari's house to give the results of the repair. Tari sat back down while listening to the radio that Tony had repaired. Strange events enveloped when the radio opened an interactive telephone session. A caller who claimed to be named Tari said that he was in the grave and being tortured. Tari was very frightened to hear the screams and moans of the mysterious caller. Until suddenly, Tari ran out of the house. Fortunately, Tony was still at the door. Tari asks Tony to throw the radio away from him. The confused Tony immediately took the radio to the trash locker and threw it away. Rini, who is still at Wisnu's house, helps tidy up the house because Wisnu has no father while his mother has just died. Vishnu's mother's body has been shrouded and rested in the house. Vishnu had time to tell about past events when his house caught fire and killed his father. Vishnu shows a book that is stored in a suitcase. Rini tells her sister Ian who was lost by a spirit. At Ari's house, Bondi and Dardo visited there. Weena and her mother just sat sideways watching her father's body stiff and lifeless in front of their eyes. Bondi brought food using a basket so that his friends would not starve that night. While they were busy eating, suddenly the electricity in the flats went out completely. There was a woman's moaning voice saying, "Prepare to prostrate to the one who is about to be born." Ari thought it was his mother's voice. Weena said that the sound came from the door. With a match, Ari checked out but found no one there. Rini and Vishnu are still busy looking for candles in the house. But because Vishnu did not have a candle, Rini took a Semperong lamp in her house. Bari's father seemed to have fallen asleep in the room. Rini immediately turned on the Semperong lamp and quietly took her father's work suitcase on the desk shelf. Bari's father woke up and prevented Rini from carrying her father's suitcase. Rini rushed back to Vishnu's house while Tony passed Ustad on the stairs of the flat. Ustad Mahmud asked Tony to accompany the patrol. Because many residents had fled, Mr. Ustad felt sorry for the bodies that were left alone in the house. Pak Ustad checks every funeral home that does not have a family. Like the flat at number 406. A husband and wife without children died together in an elevator accident so that their bodies were not guarded. Ustad Mahmud asked Tony to close the window of the apartment which was still wide open on a stormy night. Tony was forced to walk past the corpses and quickly closed the window. Pakustad even hid outside the flat as if he was afraid to go inside. After inspecting several flats, Pakustad forced Tony to check house number 1303 belonging to the grandparents on the 13th floor. He gave a lighter to Tony while Ustad Mahmoud was going to check on the victims' children of his friend Weena on the ground floor. At that time, Bondi, Dardo and Dari came out of the house to check the condition of the flat, which had a power outage. It turned out that the ground floor was already flooded where the stagnant water carried an electric current. They went up to the second floor to look for other residents who survived in the flat. Arriving at the house of Mr. RT number 207, Bondi sneaked in with the two friends. Because no one was around and the door was unlocked, Bondi broke through the door to Mr. RT's room and found the family card files of all the residents of the flat. On the walls of the room, there are photos of flats that have 14 floors. They realized that the 13th floor had a soaring roof as if there was another attic on the 14th floor. On the opposite wall, Ari found an old photo of a graveyard that was turned into a flat. On the photo it is written April 17, 1955, where the land is still spacious and lined with ancient burials under trees. Once every 29 years, the land in the photo is a silent witness if the grave land is now turned into a flat. Because it was still April 16th, Bondi began to suspect that there would be an uproar on April 17th. Elsewhere, Tony arrives in room 1303 to close the window of the house of the late grandparents who died without relatives. Because the wind was so strong, Tony's match went out several times. After closing the window, Tony was shocked by the grandmother's corpse which was dripping with water because the roof was leaking. Tony shifted the grandmother's corpse, until suddenly, Tony ran in the dark out of the house until he fell and met Dino. Before Tony left, Dino asked for help to get a fork in the flat next to his house. Dino was very idly prying the bricks of the flat next door that had been empty for a long time to steal something there. Tony had to sneak into the apartment next door through the gap in the bricks to get Dino's fork. Tony went into the next unit and found a photo album containing the new flats. In the photo album, there are people whom Tommy met while accompanying his mother to sing at a music stage. Assisted by Dino, Tony returned to Dino's house while showing the photos in the album. Tari, who was in his house alone, felt disturbed by spirits. Fortunately, Ustad Mahmoud came and advised Tari to pray. The Tari also followed the advice of Ustad Mahmoud and immediately performed ablution for prayer. When Tari was praying, suddenly, Tari saw a group of Pokings behind him. Tari ran scared out of her house until she hit Tony and Dino. Elsewhere, Weena is visited by the ghosts of 3 of her friends who were crushed to death by an elevator. Weena ran scared into the house, but the door was locked from the inside. Strangely, Weena's mother's voice was heard calling from a distance. Weena followed the figure who looked like her mother into the elevator. Suddenly, Weena fell from the top floor following her friends into the afterlife. After failing to steal her father's suitcase, Rini again invites Vishnu to take Bari's father's suitcase at his house. Rini took the suitcase and went to meet Tony. They crossed paths and headed straight for Dino's house. Tony shows the photo album he found in the next unit. After seeing the contents of the photo album, Rini had a bad feeling about the existence of the flat. Tony showed a photo of his mother who was made up like a bride but named Ramanim. Rini doubts if it is a photo of Mawarni's mother because her mother's makeup has never been so mystical. Rini shows the suitcase belonging to Bari's father which was stolen. He tried to fiddle with the number of the suitcase to open it. After opening, a stinging rot came out of the suitcase. It turns out, The contents are pieces of human fingers totaling hundreds of seeds. They immediately ran to save themselves away from the flat. Rini realized that her sister Bondi was still in the flat. Rini, Tony and Vishnu chose to look for Bondi's whereabouts together, while Tari and Dino went to the ground floor. Rini rushes to the house of Ari, Bondi's close friend whose father recently died. Together with Tony and Vishnu, they saw Weena enter a room. When followed into the room, it turned out to be. The three of them immediately ran to find Bondi, who turned out to be on the 13th floor to prove the existence of the attic. Bondi with his friends Ari and Dardo toured the flats and realized that all the units were empty. They entered the unit of the head of the RT and saw a photo of when the flat was built, which used to be a cemetery. They also realized that the flat consisted of 14 floors, but they couldn't find the stairs to that floor. On the 13th floor, Bondi finds an unlocked unit and sneaks inside. Bondi found Ian, his youngest brother, sitting on the sofa, claiming he didn't know why he was there. At the same time, the corpse that had been shrouded began to rise and terrorize all the residents of the flat that night. Rini, Tony, and Vishnu, who found Bondi with Ian, immediately brought Ian out of the flat. Meanwhile, Dino was still trying to leave the flat without touching the flooded puddle that was contaminated with electricity. Fed up with Dino's attitude, Tari leaves him to join Rini and the others. Dino was forced to follow Tari, but instead met a female ghost on the stairs. The female ghost is Raymanim, who is ready to kill anyone who meets her. Dino slowly approached the ghost to touch it. Suddenly the female ghost disappeared, leaving a piece of white cloth for Dino. The young man took the Raymanim cloth and threw it into the water. But strangely, the cloth actually floated around Dino's body, and Dino fell down with his neck stuck in the iron and died instantly. Tari, who was looking for Rini's whereabouts, was invaded by a group of terrible Pokings. Tari ran until she passed Ustad Mahmud. The man who was an expert in worship checked towards the stairs that Tari said had a Poking. Because Ustad Mahmud never returned, Tari followed him. Tari hides in the trash locker until her feet are difficult to stand on. From above his head appeared a Poking who vomited a baby fetus. The frightened Tari fell to the bottom of the locker until his body folded and died on the spot. Meanwhile, Rini and her friends met Bari's father, who was staggering. Seeing Ian behind Rini, Bari immediately went crazy and attacked the child blindly. The Semperong lamp that Rini brought broke and died, making them separate from each other. In the midst of darkness, they ran away because they were being chased by the bodies of the victims of the elevator accident who got up. Figures in black robes appeared to surprise the humans and capture them. While descending the stairs, Rini was hit by the black figure and fell unconscious. When she woke up, Rini woke up on the hidden 14th floor. Scene: Little Ian was orchestrating a black-robed figure with a secret sign language. Behind them stood Mother and the resurrected corpses of the elevator crash victims. Ian feeds Rini with leaves that make her fall asleep in a dream. Fortunately, Rini regained consciousness and vomited the leaf. Bari's father was considered negligent in carrying out his duties and was executed. Bari's body was pulled by 4 horses from 4 different directions until he died in pieces. When Tony was tied up, Butaman and Vishnu came to the floor. Butaman shot a gun at the figures in black robes, and threw black saga seeds at the Poking group so they wouldn't rebel, and directed the pair of anguish at Raymanim. The ghostly figure of the woman was thrown up and she couldn't help it. Rini, who woke up, immediately hit Ian, and rushed downstairs. Rini was assisted by Ari and Dardo to get to the boat that was brought by Butaman. After going through a terrible experience last night, they were rescued a second time by Butaman. In the boat, Butaman explained that Bari's father was a policeman who discovered the Raymanim sect, not Rayman. Because Bari never had children, he forced his wife, Milwarni, to join the deviant sect. In addition to having children, Bari and Milwarni managed to get wealth, fame, and glory while worshipping the devil. Unfortunately, Bari and Milwarni refused to give up their last child, Ian, as a sacrifice for the devil. To replace the child sacrifice, Bari was given the condition to kill 1,000 human souls. From then on, Bari volunteered to be the executor of the mysterious shooting, hoping to save Ian from the devil's clutches. However, because the promised 1,000 souls did not succeed, the devil took Ian forcibly and made him Raymanim's son. Butaman emphasized that the target of the sect's anger was actually Bari, but Milwarni was the victim. The next day after the storm subsided, Dharmana and Bhattara returned to their unit. Unexpectedly, Dharmana and Bhattara lived next door to Dino's unit, whose walls had been pried out with a fork. Dharmana said they should have been present at the time of last night's massacre tragedy on April 17. But Bhattara said that they had to let last night's events go according to plan. They said that people did not know that Dharmana and Bhattara were the real masterminds. They cover up their cover so that people are confused about which side they are on. Like the previous sequel, the film ends with the Tari scene of Dharmana and Bhattara. And then Tari. The camera moves to a photo that reads Bandung, 1955, where the faces of Dharmana and Bhattara look like they can't be eaten by age. And the film ends.